Welcome to Automation Hangout. In our show, we'll discuss the latest trends, challenges, and solutions around test automation, DevOps, and RPA. In addition, we'll have thought leaders, automation architects, and leaders who will be sharing their rich experience in implementing automation. Hello, everyone. This is your host, George Okuru. I'm very excited to welcome our special guest for today's episode, Garth Rose. Garth is the CEO of one of the most innovative test data management platform companies, Genrocket. Welcome, Garth, to our show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, George. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Garth, for joining. I know you have a very busy schedule. Thanks for taking time and coming in. So, in today's episode, we would love to have a discussion with you around some of the latest trends around test data management, as well as it will be interesting to hear some of the use cases around TDM. So to begin with, Garth, so what you've seen in the industry is, especially around testing and DevOps professionals, the general perception is that test data management is only about data masking. So is there a change in this perception now? And you being a synthetic data generation platform, how is that you're trying to work around this perception?
It's a great question, George. We've been around for about 10 years. And when we go back to 2012, when we started talking to potential customers, it was always, so how are you looking at copying, masking that production data? We would say, no, 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 no. We're doing synthetic data. And like, synthetic data, what's that? So it's been interesting. Certainly, the last several years, there's been a real shift in the marketplace, a perception awareness of synthetic data and the power of synthetic data. But there's still the marketplace is used to looking at copying and masking, whether it's a vendor solution or algorithms to sort of flip that data, the PII data. But synthetic is really coming into the mainstream now. It's kind of fun.
That is very interesting to know, Garth. So the other challenge that we have seen, especially in organizations, since there is a skyrocketing adoption of agile methodology, what you've seen is like test data provisioning is a key inhibitor when it comes to sprints as well as any kind of agile methodology. So how is that product or applications teams are trying to solve this problem around slowness with test data provisioning?
Yeah, it's a big one. So you think about the concept of agile and conducting perhaps a 3-week sprint, and then you look at each sprint needing fresh data, accurate condition control data, and across our customer base and industry, this is a major challenge. So sometimes that can be helped with our production data copies. But of course, think about it. You've got new algorithms, new modules, new capabilities. There is no production data for many of these. So now what do the teams do? They drop back to manual methods. So they say, oh, we'll write a script, which of course is not very efficient and it's hard coded. Or they'll say, well, we'll just manually enter it in the front end. Or they'll perhaps go to a spreadsheet and say, well, we'll scale this up with a spreadsheet. So these are all very manual methods, and they really are a blocker to being able to do true agile. So the concept that we like to think of is on-demand real-time data. Can you be able to model and design the data that you need and deliver it into a test automation framework, a CI/CD pipeline on demand in real time? And the concept would be that you have a test case, you deliver the data, you run the test, complete your assertion, get a result, a pass or a fail, and then you continue going. And you don't have to store the data. It doesn't age, it doesn't get stale. So it's a different way of thinking around data, but it really fits beautifully into this new agile methodology.
That's very interesting. And I know that Garth, your platform also offers self-service capabilities. So, what are some of the use cases that you can actually suggest around self-service kind of capabilities that one or a product team can actually look at implementing? Because that actually solves a lot of problems around wait time that you normally have, especially when you're dependent on a centralized test data management team. So, what are some of your
Excellent.
recommendations?
Yeah, it's a great point. So we're not necessarily saying that a central test data management team is bad, but we have to think about it. You've got perhaps dozens or hundreds of Scrum teams. They need data, and they're perhaps putting in requests from a central team. And then the saying is request and wait. And even if there's a self-service portal, The data may not be in the portal. So now someone's got to build the data, put it in the portal so that the teams can go grab that data, and there's a latency. We hear across customers it can be days. It also can be weeks. We even have a few customer cases where it's literally months to be able to get the data that they need via that model. So the notion is more of a distributed self-service model. So it's essentially saying, do I have perhaps a test data engineer or someone within a Scrum team? And that person can actually design the data themselves in a self-service model. So we start, at least this is specific to Genrocket, we start by saying we can quickly model with referential integrity an application, a particular, whether it's a customer database or a policy database with referential integrity. And now those teams can leverage the data, the referential integrity in that model to be able to design any data they need. And by design, I mean, is it a unit test data? Is it integration? Is it load, performance? Is it other kinds of data requirements that they can actually build themselves? So by pushing it to the edge and making it more truly self-service, it's distributed self-service, it greatly shortens the delivery time of data. So I love that question. It's a really clever one.
Okay, thank you, Garth. The other question that I had, Garth, was around DevOps. So what we have seen in organizations are basically like there are a lot of improvements that has happened in provisioning infrastructure as well as application. But when it comes to data, there's actually a manual process in many organizations where you actually create your environment, deploy your application, and then you have to wait for someone to actually put in data into that environment. So, how is that you're actually solving this problem around DevOps, where one in the future one should be able to look at even provisioning data along with your build and what do you say environment deployment?
Well, excellent question. Again, the first thing I would say is that each organization has a different DevOps structure. So whether it's Azure DevOps or an AWS pipeline or others, the combinations of tools are almost infinite. And so I think the first thing is to say that everybody looks at it a bit differently. The intention, the goal is the same: automation. They want to be able to spin up an environment, run their tests. Um, and you said it, more and more customers are going to the cloud so that they can sort of have a test environment management that they spin up, run their tests, and then potentially drop. That's a lower cost way of doing it. But the reality is that there's a wide mix. So that's the intention of where customers are going, but many are not there or are on the journey. So from a Genrocket perspective, we have to be really flexible and be able to deliver data. So if you want to be able to spin up data in a cloud environment, we have a repository, G for Genrocket, G repository. It spins up, it has all of the different test data cases, and they're auto synced and auto maintained. And the data now is available to be pulled right into that cloud pipeline if necessary. But then it may not be the case for the customer that they're there. It may be on-prem or other tools. So we really have to be able to take that data and integrate it into any kind of a DevOps structure. And we have all of the little components and tools to be able to integrate the data cleanly. So that's part of our architecture, is to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The other thing that was what our audience would be interested to know is about data generation itself, because there are a lot of data that you can generate. It can be as simple as a name. You may have social security number, credit card numbers, and then when you go country specific, you may actually have national IDs or maybe insurance IDs that are very specific. So
Yes.
that's a very vast area. You can actually think about hundreds of data generation or hundreds of fields where you may need to actually generate data. So how much of that is really possible, and what is it you're currently supporting? That is one. Second thing is my requirements will be very different. Sometimes I may look at provisioning data into maybe an Excel sheet, or sometimes it can be an XML or a JSON structure. So you may have to actually generate data in various formats. So do you think it is really possible to support various formats as well as various types of data generation using a platform like Genrocket?
That's absolutely was a requirement. All credit to my co-founder, Heisel Taylor. He sort of spent a decade prototyping, thinking about this, and how do you architect a solution that can generate any data and format it in any format. And he realized that to accomplish that, it had to be a component-based architecture. So you want to separate the capabilities so that they're independent in that context. So there's one component in Gen, there's many, but one component in Genrocket is called the generator, kind of an obvious name. It generates data. And we currently have just under 700 generators, and very
Mm.
much tying into what you described. So for pretty much every nation in the world, city, state, postal code, national ID, passport number, and names. And so, for example, we'll do Japanese characters, Chinese characters, and so forth. So that really sort of meets the data generation requirements. We can combine generators, what we call link generators. So they can actually talk to each other. So you could have a series of generators producing data and another one making an if then else, sort of making a decision, so you can very, very accurately control exactly the data you want. In our customer requirements, data is very, uh, you could imagine a healthcare situation where the data, if it is not valid looking, even though it's synthetic and secure, it's not valid looking, it gets rejected by the system like facets. So you have to be able to accurately control the data. So that's the generator side. Again, just about 700 generators, exactly what you said. So we have 7 different credit card generators, name generators, logical, if then else, percentage, so we can do percentages within percentages. So all what you'd expect to be able to generate the data, plus other powerful generators that can make decisions. By the way, we even have query generators that might not be understood. We can actually go pull a real data value like a member ID
Hmm.
or a customer number, because again, for data validity, you have to blend that with synthetic data, right? Now you get into the second part of your question, which is around data formats. So you said it, in a large enterprise, the variety of data formats is enormous. So of course there's going to be SQL databases, maybe some NoSQL databases like Mongo. But then, of course, there's going to be JSON or nested JSON, XML. And then Kafka is in what, 80% of the Fortune 100. So there's going to be Kafka messaging. In banking, they're going to be Swift messages. In healthcare, they're going to be X12 EDI formats. So we spent a decade building out a component called a receiver,
Hmm.
which receives the generated data and morphs it, turns it into a usable format. And we currently have 93 different receivers, almost 100. And by the way, some of those receivers do many different functions. So we can, do an FTP message. We can do images like JPEGs. So the versatility is just a matter of, if we happen not to support a particular format, we add a new receiver. And that's usually within one sprint cycle. So within 30 days, we can add those new components. So the generator generates the data, and the receiver receives it and morphs it, turns it into that usable format. So those two components are core within the Genrocket capability of producing synthetic data and pulling in real values to produce any variety and volume of data that we need.
Oh, that's a large number, 700 generators and close to 100 receivers. That's a lot of work
Correct.
as well.
It took us a decade to do
Yep,
it,
but it's very
or
interesting
more.
to very interesting work, because I've seen this variance in data requests or data formats across groups or across organizations. So it's a very interesting topic. The other, similar to data generation, Garth, we have seen a lot of investments going on into AI and machine learning. Everyone is
Sure.
trying to incorporate these capabilities into their products. But the key problem when it comes to testing is there may not be enough data available to test these algorithms or machine learning models. And the key, I think any machine learning application or any application that uses AI, it is key to actually have accuracy. And if you want to have accuracy, you need to actually test this application or algorithm with sufficient data. So are some of your customers using GenRocket to validate AI algorithms by generating large volumes of data? Is that a use case that you have seen among
Oh yeah.
your customers?
Absolutely. So, of course, we're used by developers, by testers, by quality assurance teams. That's a big use case. But most of our enterprise customers they'll use different terms, but I'm thinking of one customer where they have a data and analytics team. And so they're building different machine learning models. We're seeing this in banking, financial services, healthcare, and other industries. And these particular teams, just as you said, they need a much larger volume and variety of data, and the data has to be accurate. I'll kind of share kind of a fun one. So a large global bank uh, came to us and they said, we have consumers. It's COVID. and the consumers aren't going to the bank to deposit their checks. So we've
Hmm.
got a huge increase in them using their cell phones, their iPhones, to take a picture of the check and submit that into the bank. And we want to make sure that we can properly ingest checks, because when someone submits it, they don't take the picture correctly.
Yep.
Maybe they're meant to use a black pen to sign, but they use a colored pen. So they said, can our OCR, our optical character recognition AI system, can Genrocket produce synthetic checks? Because of course we aren't going to, in the test environment, put real customer data,
Hmm.
account numbers, stuff like that from the checks. And so we just built on our standard components and added a little extra capability. So now you can put in a check background, and on top of that, synthetically, we can add all the variables and variety. So we can produce around 10,000 checks in 2.5 minutes,
Hmm.
and they can have the check can be straight on, or it could be at an angle, 25%, 90 degrees, any kind of angle on the screen or off the screen, colored signatures, different fonts. The data can be correctly placed or not. And this was really helpful for that machine learning algorithm to get all the volume and variety. And of course, we can do the same thing in customers are using us for PDFs. You think of insurance where there's a lot of forms, right?
Yep.
And we can generate data onto any PDF form, again, for these machine learning algorithms. So it's a really exciting, interesting area that's, in our view, just accelerating. It's been in the historically a smaller use case for GenRocket, but it's rapidly growing.
That's a very interesting, what do you say, feature, Garth, because this feature would be definitely helpful for folks who are basically testing RPA bots, where you may need to actually test these bots, or maybe a intelligent document scanning solution with variety of
Exactly.
data. More often, what I've seen is like you basically get only the positive cases where you actually get a good check or a good invoice to process, but there might be scenarios where you actually have these edge cases coming in,
Right.
which is not tested or it's ignored. And when you actually deploy these bots into production, the accuracy is not that great, because you may have scenarios where you actually do where you're not able to handle such error conditions or maybe edge conditions. So that's a very interesting feature. And I believe that this will be very helpful to folks who are basically into bot testing. That's very good.
Exactly. And then just if you think of healthcare, healthcare data, of course, involves PHI, personal health information. And so there are quite a few customers who are either exactly in that area, new healthcare startups, or main customers who have divisions who are working on new capabilities. And again, the data has to be accurate, but it also has to be de identified. And of course, synthetic data by definition is de identified. So that's an area we see a lot of growth, is the healthcare domain.
Okay. The other important aspect around test data, which is often ignored in many organizations, is reusability. So you might be creating data. For example, if I'm an e-commerce company, every time you are doing a regression test of your e-commerce website, you may be generating customer data. You may be actually creating orders. You may be actually creating categories and products. And there is not much of effort that many of these teams have put in order to create reusable packs. That is one. Second thing is there might be a lot of standards, a standard set of data that you may need to generate. Let's take an healthcare scenario where you may have to actually communicate between different applications, where you might need HL7 data. Or it can be something like BAI2 in the banking or the financial services side, whereas again it's a standard. So is Genrocket offering some of these data standards or data packs along with the platform? Or if it is not there, how easy it would be for a team to actually develop reusable data packs?
A lot of interesting topics you're bringing up there. So I'll start with the reusability topic.
Yep.
And of course, in testing, you run a test, you're doing a regression, and you want the data to be the same today, tomorrow, and the next day. So GenRocket has a seeding capability where when the data is generated, it's exactly the same. Now, this is interesting. So we do not only realistic looking data, we also do pattern data. And sometimes when you're wanting unique data in very, very large volume, and I mean millions to billions of rows of data, getting realistic data isn't necessary, because actually name one, name two, name three is very useful for volume testing for load and performance. But regardless, whether we're doing pattern data or we're doing realistic looking names, George, Garth, so
Yep.
forth. Our seeding capability means that every time we're producing that data, if it's patterned or random, whatever, it's exactly the same data every time. So you have predictability of your test. So that's the first thing that I think is important to note. Now, when it gets to the sort of data standards, uh, that's part of our looking at the marketplace and sort of saying where are the pain points. So it turns out in the healthcare area, in the X12 EDI area, uh, there's a claim, healthcare claim, which is called an EDI 837. That's just the name, the numbering scheme in the EDI standard, and it's very complicated. It's a nested format. It's hundreds of layers deep potentially, and each claim, if it's an ambulance claim or chiropractic claim, is different. So we kept hearing from customers that this standard was important. So we built out an accelerator.
Hmm.
So you get the base components, the generator component, the receiver components, and so forth. And then we built a EDI store. And on top of that store, we said, well, we're going to build out all of the standard EDI transaction sets, like an 837, which is a claim, an 835, which is a payment, and so forth. And in about 10 minutes, a customer can push a button and it'll auto build about 90% of the base EDI claim. And then we have a capability, not get it too much in the weeds, but we can create then different kinds of claims, ambulance, chiropractic, and so forth. And then they can be reused over and over again for either just standard testing or, as you mentioned earlier, negative edge case and so forth. So that's one example. We have interfaces with Salesforce. You mentioned BAI2, Swift, HL7, Fire, which is in healthcare.
Hmm.
And so I wouldn't say we have every single, you know, uh, application out there covered, but many of the important industry standards we have interfaces or data receivers or formats that are packaged up, sort of these data packs that you referenced. So that's an area of growth for us too. As we talk to different partners and customers, they sort of bring these requirements to us, and then we add them to the platform. Again, we've been at this for a decade, so we have many things covered and more coming.
That's very good to know because we often run across customers asking for various type of data, and you can definitely observe a pattern. For example, as you're mentioning, it can be healthcare claims, or it can be fire or HL7 when it comes to healthcare, or it can be things like BI2 and things like that. So it's very interesting to know that you already have that capability to provide data or create data based on some of these standards. The final
Yes.
question that I have, Garth, is around data modeling. So, again, this is a perception that we hear from testing community as well as folks working in the test data management stream. The data modeling is a very time-consuming activity, and then you should be knowing both the database schema as well as the business rules to actually create meaningful data or to even generate the model. And then if you have multiple databases, especially when you're dealing with end-to-end testing, it becomes a bit complex. So, what are some of the capabilities that you're providing as part of your platform to actually simplify data modeling?
Um, Good question once again. And then this is what we hear from the customers. They essentially say, we have maybe it's a SQL database, DB2, Oracle, MS SQL, and how quickly can we model that? And that's been a long time area of investment for us. And our most popular tools, so we have 13 different tools, 13 different ways to set up a model. Started with one and then kept growing and building it out over the years. But the most popular one now is called XTS, or extract table schema. So it doesn't pull over the data, it pulls over the metadata. And we have a wizard process, and also we've added some AI tools to intelligently set up the project. And so the wizard walks the customer through the process of pulling in the metadata. There's some automations that will set up the different tables in our system with referential integrity. There's some tuning. The wizards will help you tune that, tune the different data generators so the data is accurate. And part of our AI team is really using those tools to make that setup more and more accurate, which does what? It just saves the customer time. And we've added a capability for what we would call lifecycle management. So there's a capability called G Delta, G for Genrocket, Delta for change, So of course, data models change. So we have
Mhm.
to be able to determine that we have project version 1, and now the customer, 3 months have gone by, they changed the data model. We detect that change and then go to the admin and say, your model's changed. Do you want to create version 2 and reflect those changes in version 2? Now we can do regressions with version 1 and do testing, test data for version 2. So we have 13 different ways of setting it up. The most popular is XTS. One new one we just added, which customers seem to really like, as I think there's quite a lot of interest in metadata management.
Mhm.
And so there are tools like Ab Initio and Elation. And so Genrocket has released the capability to pull in import from JSON schema from these particular tools and do a similar thing that I just described with XTS to set that up, detect changes, and so forth. So we're never going to be done. There are going to be new ways of setting up and modeling a test data project, but that's a heavy area of investment for us to be able to really make it. If you think of a life cycle of a customer, can you quickly model the project? Can you quickly design the data? And then can you take that data, and you talked earlier about sort of test environment management and DevOps, can you then take that data and deploy it quickly and easily into a test environment? So we have all of those components to have that, manage that full life cycle.
That's very interesting, Garth. So that's a very cool feature because if we can actually come work around that problem around data modeling, that'll really help project teams to model data at a much faster pace.
Faster.
So we have
Exactly.
run short of time. What we it is a wealth of information, Garth, that you have shared in the last 30 minutes. It will be very useful for our viewers who are definitely who are looking at implementing solutions around TDM. And there are a lot of solutions that you gave us today, especially around reusability, how to do data modeling, how to integrate with DevOps. So there are a lot of key critical information that is actually passed on. So I'm very grateful for you to have spent time with us today in sharing your knowledge around TDM. So looking forward for maybe another conversation towards the end of the year. I'm sure that your team is actually working on many cool features. So it will be great to have
We
you
are.
once more in our show.
And George, I'd like to say thank you. You asked excellent questions that I think are really relevant to the market today around test data management and what we would call test data automation.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate the questions that you asked today.
Thank you, Garth. Please subscribe to our podcast to stay abreast with the ever changing world of automation.